Well, a very good morning, good evening, good afternoon to you, wherever you might be in the world. Here in Perth, Western Australia, it is 9 a.m. I'm getting started very early. I'm recording today's video actually on Easter Tuesday. So I hope that you've had a wonderful and safe Easter and that it's been a pleasurable family time together. Um, Aside from that, I'd like to welcome you to the channel or back to the channel. If you're new to the channel, you may not be aware that yes, my videos can go down a tangent, so I put timing descriptions timing descriptions. No, I put timing links into the description so that you can jump to the areas of interest for you. I recognise time is a premium for all of us. Anyway, look, we're going to be talking about Black Tourmaline today. It's one of my favourite crystals. I've used it a lot over the years. And before I go into that, obviously acknowledge the returning visitors with a welcome back. Thank you for being part of my journey, as always. And they will be aware, the newbies maybe not so, that I do have a little dog, and there's every chance that he may actually come and interrupt me a little bit throughout the recording. His name's Toby, by the way, and he just gets a little bit excited. So there may be some stops and starts today, so this is just about fair warning. Anyway, straight on with it. Let's get into it. So the first thing to acknowledge is when I'm talking about Black Tourmaline, I'm talking about this stuff that we see on the image, and this is actually my favourite way of having Black Tourmaline. Of course, you can get it polished as well, but I love it in this state, which is what we call the rough. The other thing to acknowledge too is that when I was looking for images on Black Tourmaline, and I managed to source this one, I had a number of problems which took me by surprise because I was looking for the images before I did the mineral slide, which we'll be talking about in a moment, and learned that Black Tourmaline is actually called Schorl, Schorl. Once I knew its proper name, then I certainly didn't have any problems finding images. Anyway, as far as crystals go, it's been used since ancient times. It's been very popular throughout the centuries, and there's even apparently a statue of Alexander the Great that was believed to have been carved in India. So, I mean, that's how long ago. I'm just looking at my notes here. In regard to that statue, it's been dated back to the 2nd or 3rd century BC. So we're talking about a really long time that Black Tourmaline has been popular. Now, as always, with all the crystals, there's always recommendations and links to particular sun signs or star signs of the zodiac. And with Black Tourmaline, it's actually recommended for people that are Libra, Capricorn, Scorpio, or Sagittarius. Bottom line is, it doesn't matter if you're not one of these star signs. If you feel drawn to using it, then use it. I'm not one of those, but Black Tourmaline is actually one of my preferred grounding crystals, and also as a protector for auric shielding, I think is the correct word. So yeah, if you're drawn to it, buy it or use it if you find it. So when you understand the metaphysical uses of Black Tourmaline, you'll understand why I used it as a psychic and energy worker. I used to like to wear them in the bracelets that we see on this image here. Now, I did mention it's considered a stone of protection and grounding, and it's believed to shield the aura, that is, to prevent you taking on the energy of the person that you're working with, or actually who you're interacting with. If you're one of those people that turns around and says, but I'm an empath and I can't help but pick up people's feelings, whether it's at the shop or anywhere, then you might need to invest, or you might decide to invest in some Black Tourmaline bracelets like we've got here. And I used to put one on each wrist, okay, because I also was very mindful about ensuring that I didn't transfer my own personal energy along. A lot of the time back in those days, I was dealing with a fair bit of stuff within the family unit. So I didn't want to pass on board my stuff, and nor did I want to take on board other people's. So let's go back to the uses here, okay? It is believed to transmute and uplift a person's energy. It's great for use in the environment. Obviously, you wouldn't be wearing that as a bracelet. You'd have it as an ornament or something like that. And it's supposed to support really honest, truthful communication between one person and another. And you know, a lot of the time conflict and problems are a direct consequence. In fact, I believe there's evidence to support this, to a breakdown in communication, or perhaps where people are not necessarily being honest with those people around them because they don't want to hurt their feelings. And sometimes truth is the best policy. In fact, I would argue always truth is the best policy, but it's how we deliver the truth, okay? So I wouldn't go as far as saying that black tourmaline is great for softening truthful revelations from one person to another. There's other crystals that you would use to help your verbal expression and articulate your feelings in gentle ways if I stop stumbling over my words. But either way, black tourmaline does promote this truth and honesty. It's also, when we say grounding, it's about ensuring that our energy is practical and that the actions that we take are practical. So this is, I guess, for those energy workers, what you find is when you're working with energy and at a high level, a lot of the time you're really off in your head and you might forget or neglect to address the physical issues that come up in your life, or you might make some very dubious decisions. I could give you a prime example of this. I remember getting myself into real strife probably, about 22 years ago now, and I was just getting into energy and I was particularly ungrounded. I didn't know this at the time, but in hindsight I was. And I was put in a situation of I was struggling to pay my rent. And so I put it out to the universe, asked for a miracle that the money would come through, that I would be able to pay my rent. And the money arrived as asked. Let's not minimize that. I did get the money come through miraculously for me to pay the rent. But what happened on the same day was my daughter's shoes broke. And then it was like, oh my gosh, do I use this money for the rent or do I buy my daughter some shoes for school? Now, that's a hard place to be put in, because the bottom line is I used the rent money to buy shoes. So that got me in a bit of strife with the real estate, shall we say. I'm not sure really if I was put in that situation again what I might do. But certainly it created a problem back then. And it wasn't a singular case. Okay, this is why it's worth a mention. It wasn't the only time I had questionable decision making because I was ungrounded. So going back to the environmental uses of black tourmaline, just from an overview perspective, because it acts as a deterrent to negativity, it also does purify the environment that you're in. So if you've got lots of family conflicts, or you've got anxiety and anger and even violence, you know what I mean, where people are feeling frightened in the home because of what's going on, it's believed that black tourmaline will act basically to calm those energies around you. Now, I would just put a note here that it does act, this is my understanding, you might have a different understanding, and I welcome your input here, that black tourmaline does act as a sponge and absorbs the negative energy, which is part of the purification process, much like getting a sponge off your kitchen whatever to wipe down the muck off the bench, right? So it kind of acts like that. It cleans up, but the sponge will need to be cleaned afterwards to keep it in peak form so that it continue to do the job that it needs to do. So it will need special care, and we'll talk about that later in the video as part of keeping it pure and doing the job that you want it to do. Now, I should have mentioned, actually, before we start talking about the mineral information, when we talk about keeping the black tourmaline clean energetically, because I use the bracelets, mine are long broken, by the way, because they're generally made with poor quality elastic, and it just erodes and deteriorates. But either way, what I used to do is at the end of each session was take them off and hang them on my selenite, as basically rinsing the sponge, if you like. And if I had a full day of work to do, they'd be rinsed in between sessions. At the end of each day, then they would get the full clean, which would be, I guess, the equivalent of throwing the sponge in the washing machine with a disinfectant. But anyway, back to the mineral information here. Now, obviously, I mentioned that the proper name of black tourmaline is shawl. It is from the tourmaline family, which comes in a range of colours. It's got a mineral hardness of 7 to 7.5, so it's quite a hardy crystal in itself. I haven't seen it in the bluish black. I've seen it just black. Maybe that's what they call bluish black. I haven't seen it in the brownish black, but, when I check out these websites, apparently it does come in these range of colours. Look, it's fairly abundant. It's not a rare crystal at all. And as far as transparency goes, it does not have any transparency, okay? It's a solid crystal or rock or whatever you want to call it, if you're a layman like me. Actually, I forgot to mention, just in case people think that I've got some formal expertise here in regard to the mineral information. No, I don't. I've got to correct you on that. I'm a person that is interested in crystals. I love crystals. I love them from a metaphysical perspective. And sometimes it's helpful to know this kind of information when we're actually buying. But I'm not a geologist. I'm not an expert. And so any information I give you, I would suggest that you actually go and do your own research. And if you've got a different viewpoint, certainly let us know. So these are my understandings. And anyway, the locations that I found online refer to it being sourced in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Namibia, Madagascar, Brazil, Italy, Moravia, Portugal. When you go onto the main sites, they will actually tell you where these mine sites are or the source locations of a crystal. And I should point out also that because I'm in Australia, I've probably been looking at Australian Black Tourmaline. The only other thing that's worth a mention here is that really I don't think that you can confuse Black Tourmaline with too many other crystals. It is possible, maybe Epido, and I've got a really interesting crystal in the rough that looks a bit like tourmaline. I probably should put on a website saying, can you identify this crystal? It was given to me by a prospector, but it's definitely not tourmaline because it's not shaped in the way that tourmaline grows, shall we say. So speaking of that, let's take a look at these images I've put up here, okay? You've got this black tourmaline, the bigger image, and you can see that it doesn't actually develop as a point, okay? Now, when we look at the little graphics images there, you can see, and I took this off a geo website. I think it was MindDat, actually, because that's one that I go to quite a bit. And I'm not paid to promote it, just in case anybody's wondering. It's a free website anyway, I think. But basically, these images were sourced from there. And so you've got the prismatic point, I think they call it. It's called a pyramidal termination, and this is what we're looking at with the bigger black image, okay? That one's got a pyramidal termination. When we look at the other one, when I first looked at it, I thought, it's probably snapped off a cluster. I've got some information on the cluster coming up because I've got a beautiful cluster here and I'm going to show you it. But either way, I think what we're looking at with that one is not a snapped off point or whatever we like to call it. I think we're looking at what is called a triangular termination. So when it comes to buying tips, okay, yeah, sure, I've bought plenty of black tourmaline in the past. My bits are generally not polished. They're very much in the natural form because that's my preference. But as you see here, you've got a cluster. I've put the genuine because I know that these photographs are sourced or I've sourced them from sites that you may as well say are verifiable. They are collector and expert sites doing education and information. They're not selling as far as I know. But anyway, yes, look, the cluster, I've seen clusters with bigger points and prisms and all the rest of it. The cluster is the one on the left-hand side at the top. The one in the middle with the white background and with the white host rock, that's what we call what the tourmaline is growing on. That one's from Namibia. I have actually never seen one like that. I have seen the little tower there that we're looking at, the little pyramid, and certainly I've seen the tumbles. Now, the idea with the tumbles, and we can't really see that in this image here, is that even though it's polished, you can actually see that tourmaline has got striations. Now, this is a really defining point with tourmaline and identifying what you're actually buying. And you see the striations far more clearly in the image on the bottom left. You see the striations also on that pyramid. But what I find interesting too is, and you might be able to see them if you enlarge the screen, is on that polished pointed surface of the tourmaline, you can actually see that there's some striations running across there, but they've been polished off. So it's the striations is very important as far as determining if it's an original or authentic piece of tourmaline, as well as if you're buying it in the rough, the shape of the top. Now, let me just check my notes as I swallow. Sorry. Oh, just that sometimes people get very confused when they're buying black obsidian and black tourmaline and trying to tell the difference between them. And so, what I found, to be honest, I don't have a problem telling them apart. I think that's just because I've looked at both of them so many times over the years. Look, while they're both black, the black tourmaline is considered to be more lustrous and can have a metallic sheen. Now, that's probably because of the striations, whereas black obsidian has a smoother and more glass-like appearance, and it can have small inclusions or variations in the translucency. One of the things I saw, and I'm not 100% certain with this, is that black tourmaline actually feels heavier in the hand. But realistically, if you've just got one point and you're trying to establish if that point is, that's not going to be particularly helpful, I must say. So I think the real determining factor, if you're not used to looking at black obsidian and black tourmaline, is that black tourmaline is going to have the striations. Now, beyond that, I'm not sure if you can hear my dog running around. I did warn you. Beyond the identification part, it's very difficult to actually tell when you're looking and purchasing online. So here we go. I always recommend that people, I'm going to have to laugh. Sorry, I've got to put it on pause. Sorry, I've got wooden floorboards and he was a bit excited with his squeaky toy there running back and forth. Anyway, going back to this, yes, if you're going to buy online, which is not my preferred option, I encourage most people to go into a shop and at least have a conversation. First thing is, actually, you're always better to buy from a verifiable seller, okay? That way you know exactly what you're getting. And their reputation hangs on the delivery of the real deal and not fakes. That's not to say that they don't get stung from time to time, because I've seen it happen on more than one occasion, but at least they will be very clear and let people know when they've actually bought a faulty batch. Now, anyway, back to buying, say, black tourmaline online. As with all crystals online, you want to get an idea of the length, the size, the dimensions. You want to have close-up photos. You want to get it from all angles, actually, because you don't want to be buying a slice. I mean, I don't think they're ever going to sell black tourmaline in slices, but you want to have a really good look at it. And then you want to know the weight. You want to know the price. You want to be able to do a comparison. You want to check where people are selling it. And you want to see if there is additional prices put on. Because if you're buying on the platform, sometimes there's freight, sometimes there's service fees, tax, handling. You know what I mean? Then they might do the shipping fees, but also put on an extra charge. So you want to make sure that you've looked at all of the costs and the currency, and then do a currency conversion, because sometimes when we buy these products overseas, we can actually buy it locally for a cheaper rate, because when the wholesalers buy and import, they actually get discounted rates because they're buying in bulk, and those bulk rates include discounts on shipping. So do a comparison. You might be better off to buy locally, even if it's not your particular intention. What else can I say? Probably that's it. If you think of anything, leave a comment, please. Now, I'm not going to go into all of the attributes specifically because, of course, I've listed them up here. If you've got questions, feel free to ask them. But just to explain why I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail is because the video will be way too long. And I've done a video of my cluster and how to not treat your crystals at the end of this video, and that one runs for nearly 5 minutes. So what I'll do is I'll just basically give you an overview here of how you can use it. It's all very clearly laid out here. The only one that people might, well, actually, I guess there's a couple. For those people that are believers in Atlantis and Lemuria, it's believed to actually support you connecting with those energies or spirits, if you like, entities or whatever that have lived during those lifetimes. Now, I always say, look, take on board what you believe or what feels right to you and discard what doesn't. Then the other thing is, I'm just looking at this. When we talk about sick building syndrome, we're talking about a building, if you go to work, where everybody comes down with the flu or something like that, and it just goes from one person to the next. So if you're working in an environment where there's sick building syndrome going on, then you would like to have probably some tourmaline bracelets, if not an ornament, out there. And I say black tourmaline is what I meant. It's also believed to act as a protector against electromagnetic frequencies, and encourage people to tape a little bit to their mobile phone if they're into that. It's not something that I do, by the way, but it might be something that you're interested in. When we talk about geopathic stress, we're talking about areas where you've got, I guess, environmental stress. The first thing that comes to mind for me is actually things like where you're living near mangroves, and you can see the mangroves by the ocean are starting to suffer. There's something going on beneath the surface. There is something that is happening that is impacting on the environment and ultimately your own health by consequence, shall we say. So people that are living in areas where there's a lot of high voltage power lines and that kind of stuff could also, I guess, say that they're living in environments of geopathic stress as well. It's where the environment is being altered some way by mankind and creating at least a perception of harmful health impacts on those people, or just energy impacts where their aura becomes vulnerable to the frequencies that are going on around them. If you're living in an environment like that, then you might want to have an ornament of it, of black tourmaline in your house, pretty much like what I've got here. Now, as previously stated as well, it is most definitely recommended for those people that work in metaphysical areas doing healings or psychic services or whatever. And as I said, I used to wear one on each hand, or on each wrist rather. This slide is also pretty self-explanatory. I'm stumbling over my words. I had to actually stop and start because of my little doggy. You know, it happens. But at the same time, I must do that caution. I've got to bring to your attention that there is no physical evidence to support the claims about physical health benefits or even emotional health benefits. Okay, so you would, if you've got any of these conditions, you would be encouraged, I would encourage you to give it a try. You've got nothing to lose by using black tourmaline as part of your treatment program. However, I would also discourage you from disengaging from your treating expert. So if you've got a GP and you've got all these health problems or whatever, stay engaged with them and follow the mainstream stuff, but also wear your black tourmaline, and you might find really positive outcomes. I'd like to think that you would. So from an emotional and psychological perspective, this slide is also pretty self-explanatory. Once again, if you've got questions, ask them, write a comment down below and I'll answer them. Just what I haven't put on the slide is that it's actually recommended for people that struggle with learning issues. They may have intellectual disability, or it might simply be poor memory recall. It's also supposed to be helpful for those people with dyslexia. So you may as well say just learning problems or barriers to learning, it's supposed to benefit them. In regard to family relationships, I did mention before that you could put it in perhaps the common areas of your house. If you've got a cluster like what I have, I'll show it to you in a moment. And I did actually, I had some issues many years ago now with family dynamics, and so I used to keep it out in my family area. But I also, and you'll see this in the video as well, that when it came to the clearing and cleansing, I always put amethyst, carnelian and selenite onto the actual cluster. So the cluster of black tourmaline that I have was black tourmaline in a host rock called schist. It's a very interesting piece actually. But the other thing is too, beyond that, once obviously the family dynamics were sorted and all the rest of it, I used to keep it in my treatment room, if you like. I call it a treatment room, but it was more like a reading room because I wasn't really doing healings back in those days. I was doing a lot of psychic tarot stuff, and a lot of my clients would present with some pretty significant trauma and multiple traumas. So there was a lot of stuff that used to be shifted in the process of doing a service for them. What else can I just looking at my notes here? Look, I'm going to stick to this as fairly self-explanatory. If you want to add more, if you've got more information to add, or if you've got questions, just leave a comment below and I will most certainly respond. So when it comes to the chakras, Black Tourmaline is basically associated with the base chakra, and that's pretty well it. It's a very practical, and when I say that's it, that could sound like I'm minimizing it, but the base chakra is a very important chakra as far as the chakra system goes, because at the end of the day, that's like building the foundations of a house. So we need to have a strong base chakra so that the rest of the structure remains stable. So it is focused pretty well solely on the base. To put this into perspective, okay, if you were going to build a 7-story building, you would need to ensure that that first floor or the ground floor is really stable so that it can withstand any of the environmental impacts that happen around us. Because you will know, you get an earthquake, if we're talking about a building, an earthquake, a tidal wave, and all the rest of it. If that structure is not built strongly, it can all come collapsing in a very quick heap and in a hurry. So the idea is that we focus the black onto that base chakra and stabilize the rest of the structure. So yeah, this is Black Tourmaline. This is its focus, its number one focus. Now, I've kind of talked about how you can use Black Tourmaline in your day-to-day living as I've done this video. But before we run back over that again, just draw your attention to this image here, which is a sphere of Black Tourmaline. And you can see that there are these cracks within it. Okay, so these are the floors. So while it's a solid rock, and by the way, these floors aren't a case of saying, oh, well, it's imperfect and it's not a nice piece or whatever. It's part of its beauty. You know, beauty is not always this perfect, round, polished finish. Sometimes these little cracks are just part of it, you know. But anyway, it has a very positive effect on the body if you can create a wand using it with selenite. Some people recommend using it with rose quartz, will give you even better results. It's recommended, and I've recommended too, that you have Black Tourmaline on your person when you're doing energy work. But at the same time, if you work in an environment where there's lots of electronics, or say you sit at a computer desk, which is probably what I do most of the time these days, I probably should actually invest into some more bracelets. You know, I've got other crystals around anyway to help with EMF, but the point could be that you could put some Black Tourmaline by your computer desk as part of mitigating any effects. I mentioned the fact that there's a recommendation that you can tape a little piece onto your mobile phone as part of doing that protection against EMF. If you're doing your metaphysical work, there's another thing that you can do, which is actually either place it in the environment that you're working in or place it at your feet. So if you've got somebody, say, on a table and you're doing a healing treatment, you could put some under the table or whatever. You know, it will certainly assist with it to diffuse any tensions. As I said, if you've got stuff happening at home in the family, you could place it out in the family areas. If you're into gridding, you would put it at your feet during a gridding session. And generally, yeah, just wear it for protection as a talisman. Any number of ways that you can use it. I like to wear those macrame necklaces and interchange the tumble stones now. That I find that to be a good way of working with crystals. But I think, to be quite honest, and I've been looking for them for a while, I'm struggling to find the Black Tourmaline bracelets that I used to have and I used to really like. And this is because I prefer the raw beads as opposed to the polished beads. So I don't know. If you know where I can find a good supplier, that would be wonderful. Please leave a comment. Now, as an oracle, there's a few ways that we could actually interpret Black Tourmaline. And my primary one is to actually turn around. I feel that it basically is saying, watch your boundaries. It's now time to ask yourself, you know, are your current state of mind and your feelings yours, or are you taking on board the feelings and emotions of others? Because, right, there's a number of reasons. Maybe you're not outlining your boundaries effectively with other people. Maybe you're not even clear with your boundaries for yourself. Maybe you don't know what your boundaries are. And the other thing is that are you feeling unsafe because people are reacting to what they perceive as you violating their boundaries or lines in the sand? You know, now I will draw on my own experience for this. Okay, for me, many years ago, I was like, I've got no secrets, I've got nothing to hide, I'm an open book. So therefore, I had no personal boundaries. It was what you see is what you get, and I'll just say it was just boom out of my mouth. And that's fine because it wasn't a problem back then. What the problem was, I didn't have any boundaries, and so therefore I didn't see the boundaries in other people, and I didn't understand why they were getting upset and angry with me when I used to cross their boundaries. And it could happen very easy for people, and they can have, when a person's boundaries is crossed more than once or on multiple occasions, they can become very, very reactive. I'm not going to go into the details of it. Suffice to say that a person's boundaries can be very tight. You might have no boundaries like what I did, but the people around you might have very tight boundaries. And by that I mean they're very close. They don't like talking about their stuff. They have their, they keep their vulnerabilities, what they perceive to be their vulnerabilities, very close to their heart, and it takes a lot for them to bring it out. And a vulnerability doesn't mean necessarily something that they're ashamed about. It can simply be that, particularly if the person's got PTSD or something like that, it can be that they try to guard their emotional reactions to certain things. They are aware perhaps that they have an overreactive response to certain situations because it triggers them. That's what we call a trigger. It flicks them back to a space and place where they were not happy, and then they have a big emotional reaction because they've been triggered, literally. When they're triggered and raging, they're not actually going off at you. They're remembering and recalling the original injury, but you've actually brought it to the surface. And generally a boundary might be when they turn around and say to you, I've asked you not to do X and Y because of X and Y. You might perceive this because you're an open book, that they're attempting to be controlling of you. However, the reality is they're actually trying to control themselves. Not always, of course. There's always exceptions to the rules. Sometimes they are trying to control you. But the boundary issue is when oh, look, I'll tell you, it's a really funny thing in hindsight, but it wasn't funny at the time. I was triggering a person repeatedly because I was playing relaxation music, and I didn't realise that brought back bad memories for the person. I don't need to go into what the story was, but I didn't understand the reaction. I didn't understand why I was getting blasted by this person for playing this music. Once I understood, it was like, well, okay, I'll wear a headset, I love my relaxation music. I love my little tinkly stuff. And in fact, it's part of my health and well-being. For me to remain healthy is to have this beautiful music happening. It transports me. But I can do it with a headset. I don't have to have it playing out through the speakers and make other people uncomfortable in the process. So that is an example of boundaries, I hope, in a very simple form for you. So the message for me, I guess, would be take a look at what's going on with your boundaries. And the other thing is, how safe are you feeling? Do you need to do some work on that bottom floor? Okay, that release of fear. Take care of your base needs. Take a look at what the red chakra means. Explore that and see if there's any areas that you can work upon to improve it. So I'm definitely not a photographer or a videographer, okay, as you can see here. But what I've done is I've taken a couple of photos, not good ones, of my tourmaline. I've been experimenting with light. I've got a light box anyway. I wouldn't say that I've got it down pat, but the point of doing the activity was actually to give you an idea of what I mean when I talk about crystal care. Now, so let's talk about crystal care right now and not my cluster, because you get to look at that in the next slide. The thing with tourmaline is it's actually quite hardy. It doesn't scratch easily, but it most definitely can scratch the other crystals if it's in the rough form. So you would want to keep it separate from others. It will certainly cope with water. Tourmaline will cope with the water if you need to wash it off and things like that. To keep it clean and pure, like I said, soaking it like a sponge. I was told years ago when I bought this particular cluster that the way to keep it clear was to keep a piece of amethyst and a piece of carnelian and a piece of selenite on it. Now, I'll talk about that more in the next slide, which is a video. Now, the thing with my cluster, though, is that it's tourmaline in schist, if my memory serves me right. And when we say schist, it's SCHIST. Okay. where I failed my own cluster is that I didn't care for it properly, given that the schist doesn't have the same hardiness that tourmaline does. But I'll leave you to talk about that or listen to that on the next slide. Other than that, if you've got it on a host rock, make sure you know what the host rock is and how to treat the host rock. But other than that, it is just the same old thing that you use with any of the other crystals. Avoid harsh chemicals. Don't store it next to the more delicate crystals. Do make sure that you clear, cleanse, and charge it metaphysically regularly, especially if you're doing metaphysical work, or especially if there's some volatility happening in the home. What else have I got here? It can tolerate sunlight, okay, because it gets the black colour from iron content in the earth, so I'm told. So it is considered to be fairly stable. This will not necessarily be the case for other types of tourmaline, okay? If you look at the watermelon tourmaline, I would imagine that will fade because it doesn't have iron, okay? If you're like me and you like to charge your crystals under rain, sunlight, or full moon, depending on what I'm drawn, black tourmaline as a standalone should cope well with all of it, okay? The other options might be using the earth, grounding it, saging it, what else, sound, whatever. Leave us a note or a comment or whatever on how you charge your tourmaline and how you take care of it, because I'm sure the rest of us will take it on board. Now, before I go on to the next slide, actually, do you know what? I'm going to give you fair warning here. I'm going to repeat it just in case people jump from this slide to the next slide or they skip this slide altogether. I need to offer an explanation for the explanation for the poor quality of that slide. It is what it is, though. So this is a little bit of an experiment for me to try and give you guys an idea of what my tourmaline cluster looks like. So just bear with me here, because I thought I've taken a few photographs, but I wanted you to actually see what it looks like in as far as not only do we see the tourmaline prisms in here, and I think most of them are actually triangulated if we go back to the content. Now, excuse my bumpy ride. This is an experiment for me. I've never done it before, but we've got a variety anyway of tourmaline formations. What we're looking at here is how I care for my crystal from an energetic perspective. To keep the cluster in good working order, I actually place an amethyst tumble and the carnelian tumble, and then I put the selenite across both of them. The selenite little rod, it doesn't have to be this big, by the way, as long as it's touching and bridging. That's my understanding of it. It's kind of fallen off the purple one here, and that's okay for now. But the other thing I wanted to show you is because this particular cluster has actually been neglected. Now, I may have mentioned in the notes, I can't remember, but what we have here is a cluster. It's obviously one of my prized possessions of tourmaline, and if I recall correctly, because this is so old now, it's probably, maybe about 12 years ago that I bought it. Anyway, so I haven't really cared for it as I should have. Now, what you can see here is this greeny type bit. That, I think, is where the air is getting to it, and it's deteriorating it. If my memory serves me well, this is a tourmaline in schist, schist. I could be wrong. If you're a geo, let me know. But either way, it's actually a very beautiful metallic, shiny silvery that may not be reflected here in the video that I'm taking. But these little green bits that I'm focusing on now, I think that's a deterioration that we would put down to oxygenation, if I can speak, or oxidization of the actual crystal. The other thing that I've noticed too is because I haven't actually cared for this cluster, and by that I mean, look, it's been in boxes, it's been packed away at different times. What I've got here, can you see those little holes down there at the bottom of it? That's actually where little bits of the tourmaline points have actually broken away from the cluster itself. But either way, it's still a very pretty cluster. It's one that I really like, and it's one that cost me a fair penny back in the day. And I imagine if I was going to sell it, which I'm not going to, it would probably fetch a pretty penny as well, because even though you've got some oxidisation happening here, I think this is a rather large, what they would call a rather large specimen that would still warrant a good price. But the other thing is too that I actually have subjected this to water. Now, as I have done my photography is just absolutely dreadful. As I've been doing my research on tourmaline and all the rest of it, I've actually recognised that really I should not have been subjecting this particular cluster to water, but I did put water on it to basically to get the dust off, and because it had been packed away, I did things like put it out overnight in the rain and stuff like that, which this is why I say it's been mistreated. It's not that I've gone out and played baseball with it or anything like that. It's just I haven't been treating it with the proper care that it actually deserves and it needs. So I'm just pulling back a little bit here, letting you get a better look at it. I'd like to take photographs of it from a different angle as far as the video is concerned, but I'm not going to. Hopefully you'll get the gist of what it is that I'm trying to show you. Oh, and who knows, maybe one day I'll get better at doing videography. Anyway, that's that. Anyway, my friends, I am going to wind this up for today. Sorry about the quality of the last slide that you've seen here, but I figured it was worth still putting up. Just because you get to have a look at the real deal, what happens, and look up close. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to show you up close the damage. I'm not sure that all the images have translated across properly for you, but I certainly hope that it did. But in the meantime, I'm going to say, look, thank you very much for being a part of my journey, new and returning visitors. I'm going to wish you a wonderful day, wonderful week. Be blessed. Take care. Catch you on the next one. Bye-bye for now.